She had $47 in her checking account, a field full of cracked earth, and a decision to make that would define the rest of her life. Most people would have walked away. She picked up a shovel. There's something about a woman who refuses to quit. Even when the sky refuses to give water, even when the bank sends its third notice, even when the neighbors shake their heads and look away. That makes you want to lean in closer and ask, what does she know that the rest of us don't? This story is about that woman. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, you're going to feel something shift inside your chest. Before we begin, if you've ever held on to something when every sign told you to let go, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's go back to the summer the ground forgot how to drink. The town of Millhaven, Kansas, sits in that particular stretch of the American heartland, where the horizon is so flat and so wide that it can make a person feel both infinite and completely invisible at the same time. It's the kind of place where people still wave from their porches, where the grain elevator at the edge of town is the tallest structure for 30 miles, and where the word drought doesn't arrive like news. It arrives like a verdict. Nell Voss had lived in Millhaven her entire 53 years. She was born in the house she still lived in, the same white-clapboard farmhouse her grandfather had built in 1941 with lumber he'd hauled from Wichita in 2 trips. The house had a sagging porch, a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and dried herbs, and a root cellar that her late husband, Augusto, used to call the best room in the house because it stayed cool even in July. Augusto had died 14 months earlier, a heart attack fast, the doctor said, as if that was supposed to be comforting. He'd been walking the fence line on a Tuesday morning, checking for the gap where the neighbors' cattle kept getting through. And by the time their hired hand Reeves found him, the grass beneath him had already gone warm from the sun. Nell did not crumble. That's the first thing people in Millhaven would tell you about her. She did not crumble, she did not sell, and she did not ask for help. Not publicly, anyway. She took over the books. She renegotiated the equipment loan at the Millhaven Savings and Trust with a banker named Cordwell, who had the good sense to give her a fair rate without making her feel small. And she planted the winter wheat herself that October, with her nephew Jasper helping on weekends. But this story isn't about that first year of survival. This story is about the second year, the year the rain stopped. By April, the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the Voss property, the one Augusto had named Perseverance Creek as a joke, because it dried up every August anyway, had already gone to dust. The cattle in neighboring fields were being sold off early. Feed prices were climbing. The county extension office sent out an advisory in late March that used the word severe 4 times in 2 paragraphs. Nell read it at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her and a notepad where she'd been doing math that didn't come out right no matter how many times she reworked it. She had 220 acres. Of those, roughly 180 were workable. She'd put in winter wheat the previous fall, and it had come up thin. Not a disaster, but not enough. The remaining ground she'd been planning to plant with sorghum in May, a drought-tolerant crop that Augusto had always called the honest crop because it never promised more than it could deliver. The problem was water. The well was running low. The irrigation pivot on the south field had a pump motor that was making a sound it shouldn't make, and the quote from the equipment dealer in Pratt, a flinty man named Harwick, whom Nell had never warmed to, was $11,000 for the repair. She had $47 in checking. She had a small reserve, yes, in savings, about $6,000, but that was the number between her and nothing, between her and the bank taking the land. And still, on the 1st of May, she drove into town and bought seed. Her neighbor to the north, a retired teacher named Olive, who'd kept chickens for 30 years and knew more about soil than most agronomists Nell had ever met, watched from across the road as Nell loaded the bags into her truck. "You sure about this?" Olive called. Nell looked up, squinted at the sky, white and hard and unyielding as a plate of old porcelain. "No," she said. "Are you sure about anything?" Olive laughed, a short, dry sound like a struck match. "Fair point." Nell drove home, and she planted her last seeds into ground that hadn't seen meaningful rain in 61 days. The planting took 4 days. She worked from first light until the heat became dangerous, usually around 2 in the afternoon, then rested in the root cellar for an hour, Augusto's best room, and went back out until dusk. Her nephew Jasper offered to come out on the weekend, and she told him she'd call if she needed him, which they both understood to mean she wouldn't call. There was something Nell needed to do alone, though she couldn't have explained it clearly. It had to do with the ground, with her hands in it, with the particular silence of the field at 6 in the morning, when the only sound is the soft resistance of soil and the distant complaint of a meadowlark. The county extension agent, a young man named Birch, who couldn't have been more than 30 and still had the eager eyes of someone who believed problems were meant to be solved, came by on the second day. He parked his white truck at the edge of the field and walked out to where she was working. "Mrs. Voss," he said. He always called her Mrs. Voss, even though she'd told him twice that Nell was fine. "You're aware the moisture forecast through June is—" "I read the advisory," she said without stopping. Birch stood there a moment, hands in his pockets, watching her work the planter down the row. He was a decent young man. She didn't blame him for what he was about to say. "The county's got a buyback program," he said carefully, "for seed stock. If you decide not to plant or to pull back acreage, I know about the program. It's a reasonable option. A lot of folks are taking it." Nell stopped the planter, straightened up, looked at Birch directly, the way she looked at things she wanted to understand fully. "My grandfather planted this field in 1946, she said. "Worst drought in 20 years. You know what the county extension man told him?" Birch shook his head. "To sell." She picked up the planter again. "He didn't." Birch nodded slowly, and had enough grace not to say anything else. He tipped his hat, an actual gesture, she noted, which she respected, and walked back to his truck. She watched him go, and felt something settle in her chest. Not defiance exactly, something quieter, something that had the weight of a decision fully made. That evening she sat on the porch after dark and called her daughter Sable, who lived in Denver and worked in hospital administration, and worried about Nell in the particular way that adult children worry, at a distance, with guilt folded into it. "Mum, how are you actually doing?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Did Birch come by today?" "How do you know about Birch?" A pause. "Jasper told me." Nell closed her eyes. Her family was a well-functioning intelligence network. She'd give them that. "I planted," she said. The silence on the other end had texture. It was the silence of a daughter doing math, the same math Nell had done at the kitchen table, arriving at the same uncomfortable sum. "Mom?" "I planted, Sable. It's done." Another beat of silence. Then, quietly, "Okay." That one word held about 14 different things inside it, and Nell received all of them. She stayed on the porch after they hung up, listening to the dry wind come across the field, moving through the young rows of seed like it was reading them. The sky to the west was the color of an old bruise, no clouds, no promise. She went inside and went to bed. By the 3rd week of May, the sorghum was up. Barely, tentatively, in the way that seedlings emerge when the soil is too dry, like something apologizing for its own existence. Nell walked the rows every morning. She knew each section the way you know a road you've driven 10,000 times, not by looking, but by feel. She could tell by the color of the soil at 6 inches where moisture remained and where it was already gone. There was a pocket of ground in the northwest corner of the south field, about 30 acres, that had always retained moisture longer than the rest. Something about the slight depression in the land, the way it cupped. Augusto had called it the bowl, and he'd always planted it last, let it tell him what it wanted to grow. The bowl was doing better than everything else. The seedlings there were upright, their color true. Nell spent extra time in that section, crouching down, reading the ground the way her grandfather had taught her father and her father had taught her. It was in the bowl, on a Wednesday morning, that she encountered her neighbor to the south for the first time in 4 months. Levon Marsh was 64 years old, had farmed his family's land since he was 19, and had a reputation in Millhaven for being simultaneously the most knowledgeable and most difficult man in the county. He and Augusto had been friends, the complicated, argumentative kind of friends that men who respect each other become. Since Augusto's death, Levon had kept his distance in the way that some men do when they don't know how to speak to grief. He appeared at the fence line that morning with his hat in his hands and a look on his face that Nell recognized as the opening position of a man who has rehearsed what he's about to say several times. "Nell, Levon, your sorghum's coming up. Some of it." He looked out across the field. The silence between them had the particular quality of two people who have known each other long enough that silence is a form of conversation. "I've got a water-sharing arrangement with the Presley operation up near Hayesville," he said finally. "Groundwater lease. They've got capacity they're not using this season." Nell looked at him. He kept his eyes on the field. "I could add your acreage to the arrangement," he said. "Split the cost 3 ways. It wouldn't be cheap, but it'd be better than—" He stopped, started again. "The pivot motor on your south field. Harwick quoted you 11,000. I know a man in Pratt who can do it for 6.5. Used parts, but good ones. His name's Elias. I can make the call." Nell was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. Levon finally looked at her. His eyes were a specific shade of grey-blue that she'd always associated with Kansas sky in October. Clear, a little tired, honest. "Because Augusto would have done it for me," he said, "and I owe him one." Nell looked back at the bowl, at the young plants standing up straight in the dry morning air. "Make the call," she said. Levon nodded once, put his hat back on, turned to go. "Levon?" He stopped. "Thank you." He lifted one hand in the kind of acknowledgement that substitutes for the things men in the heartland don't quite know how to say, and walked back toward his own land. Nell stood in the bowl for a long time after he left, feeling the particular sensation of a wall coming down inside her. Not the wall she'd built to survive, which she still needed, but a smaller one. The one that had been keeping out help. June arrived and the drought did not break. The governor declared an agricultural emergency in western Kansas. Federal assistance applications were being processed, which in practical terms meant they existed on paper and would arrive sometime after the crisis had resolved itself one way or another. In Millhaven, the grain elevator reported that its storage receipts were down 40% from the previous year. The diner on Main Street, run by a woman named Corva, who had been feeding the county since 1987 and who understood the local economy better than any economist, started a quiet tab system for farming families. No announcement, no sign on the wall. If you needed to eat and couldn't pay right now, you ate and settled up later. Most people did. Some never did. Corva never mentioned it either way. Nell heard about the tab from Olive, who'd heard about it from the postmaster, a methodical man named Sidel, who functioned as the town's informal information infrastructure. "She's been doing it for years," Olive said. They were sitting on Olive's porch in the early evening, sharing a pitcher of iced tea. "People just don't talk about it." "That's the Millhaven way," Nell said. "It's the good part of the Millhaven way," Olive corrected. The pivot motor was replaced in the second week of June. Elias drove up from Pratt in a truck full of equipment and worked for 2 days straight with the help of a young man he'd brought along named Crockett, who was 22 and moved with the kind of focused efficiency that Nell associated with people who'd learned to work hard early and hadn't forgotten it. The water-sharing arrangement with the Presley operation came online on June 15th. It wasn't a flood. It wasn't salvation. It was enough to keep the sorghum alive, enough to hold the line while the sky continued its refusal. Nell managed the irrigation with the precision of a surgeon. She had a notebook, a green composition book that had been Augusto's, that still had his handwriting in the first few pages, equipment notes from 3 seasons ago, in which she tracked soil moisture readings, irrigation schedules, and weather projections with a kind of obsessive care that was also, she recognized, a form of prayer. Her son-in-law Greer, who lived in Denver with Sable and worked in technology and was a good man who understood almost nothing about farming, called in late June and offered to wire her money. "I appreciate it," Nell said. "Is that a yes?" She thought about the 6,000 in savings, the pump repair, the water arrangement, the math. "Not yet," she said, "but I'll tell you if that changes." Greer, to his credit, simply said, "Okay, the offer stands." He didn't push. She'd always liked him for exactly this quality, the ability to offer without requiring gratitude. That same week, something happened that Nell hadn't anticipated. A woman appeared at her door on a Thursday afternoon. She was perhaps 40, with a sun-worn face and careful eyes, driving a truck with an Oklahoma plate. Her name was Dessa. "I heard you were farming through the drought," Dessa said. "I hope it's not strange that I came by. I'm a journalist. I'm doing a piece on small farmers in the emergency zone." Nell looked at her for a moment, looked at the recorder in her hand. "You want to write about me?" Nell said. "If you're willing." "Why me specifically?" Dessa considered this with what seemed like genuine respect for the question. "Because everyone I talk to says the same name," she said. "When I ask who's still planting, who's still working, they say Nell Voss." Nell was quiet for a moment. "Come in," she said finally. "I'll make coffee." The article Dessa wrote ran in a regional agricultural journal and then was picked up by a national publication that covered rural America with more seriousness than most. Nell didn't read it immediately. Dessa had sent her a copy, a digital link, which Nell had to ask Sable to help her access, but it sat in her email for a week before she opened it. When she did, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward. Dessa had written about the drought, about the emergency zone, about the federal assistance applications sitting in queues, but she'd also written about something Nell hadn't expected to see rendered in words, the particular kind of knowledge that accumulates in a body after 50 years of watching land. The way Nell read soil, the way she made decisions based on information that had no formal name. "She doesn't talk about resilience," Dessa had written. "She talks about soil moisture and root depth, and the way a particular field corner has always held water better than the rest. She talks about specifics." I think that's the whole story, actually. Not the widowhood, not the drought, not the financial pressure, though all of those things are real and present. The story is that she has never confused what she knows with what she feels. And out here this summer, that distinction might be the only thing between her and losing everything. Nell read that paragraph 3 times. She thought about Augusto, not in grief exactly, but in the specific way she thought about him when something happened that she needed to tell him. A reflex that hadn't gone away, and she'd decided she didn't want to go away. "I made the paper," she thought at him. Sort of. She could hear his laugh, the particular shape of it, quick, low, always a little surprised, as if the world kept delighting him against his better judgment. The article generated something Nell hadn't anticipated. Letters, emails, technically, forwarded to her by Dessa, but she thought of them as letters, from other farm women, from people in drought zones in California, in Texas, in Nebraska, from a woman named Overline in Oklahoma who had been farming alone for 9 years since her husband left, and who wrote, "I never thought anyone would write about what we actually know. Thank you for letting her." Nell read that one several times too. She wrote back to Overline on a Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea and the notepad she used for correspondence, a pen she'd had for years that she'd never been able to replace because Augusto had given it to her from a farm supply catalog as a joke birthday gift that she'd loved sincerely. She wrote, "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't leave." Sometimes that's enough and sometimes it isn't, and you have to be okay with not knowing which one it's going to be until it's done. But I'd rather not know the ending than not try. Stay with your land, Overline. It knows you're there. She mailed the letter the next morning. Sidell at the post office looked at the Oklahoma address and nodded once, which was his version of a meaningful comment. Meanwhile, July came in like a sentence with no end. The heat index hit 109 on the 12th. The sorghum in the east sections was struggling, not dead, but struggling, which in farming is a state that requires constant attention and offers no guarantees. The bowl held, the northwest corner held. The irrigation kept the most vulnerable sections alive with a precision that felt, some mornings, like holding water in your cupped hands. Manageable only because she never looked away. Olive came over in the evening sometimes. They didn't always talk. Olive would sit on the porch and work on something. She always had something, a small repair or a piece of needlework. And Nell would sit with her coffee and they would watch the dark come across the field, and it was enough. On a Wednesday evening in mid-July, Levon came by unannounced for the first time. He stood at the foot of the porch steps with his hat in his hands again. She was beginning to understand this was his posture for moments of vulnerability, and said, "I've got a couple of bales of hay going bad in the north barn. Thought maybe you'd want it for your kitchen garden, the soil amendment." "I don't have cattle," Nell said. "I know, for the garden, the composting." She looked at him. He looked somewhere past her right shoulder. "Levon, you drove over here at 7 in the evening to offer me spoiled hay. It's not spoiled, it's going. Why didn't you just call?" He was quiet for a moment. "Wanted to see how the sorghum's looking in the bowl." Nell looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Sit down, Levon. I'll get you some iced tea." The rain came on a Sunday in late July, or rather the possibility of rain came, which is not the same thing and is sometimes crueler. The forecast had been shifting for 4 days. Nell watched it with the controlled attention of someone who has learned not to want things too loudly, because wanting out loud seems to push them further away. The television meteorologist in Wichita, a young woman named Petra, whom Nell had come to regard as a kind of oracle, though an unreliable one, kept adjusting the percentages upward, 40, 60, 70. By Saturday, the sky to the southwest had begun to build. Not clouds exactly, more like intention. A darkening at the edges of things. The wind shifted. Nell walked every section that afternoon. She walked the east sections where the sorghum was thinnest, walked the bowl, walked the fence line along Levon's property. She walked the way you walk when you need to know exactly what you have before a decision is made for you. Olive came over around 5 and stood on the porch looking southwest. "That's something," she said. "Could be nothing," Nell said. "Could be." Birch called at 6:15. "Mrs. Voss, you're seeing the forecast." "I'm seeing it. 72% chance of measurable precipitation overnight. Could be significant. They're saying potentially 1 to 2 inches in the southwestern zones." A pause. "You're in the zone." Nell was quiet. "That would change things," Birch said carefully. "Yes," she said. "It would." She didn't sleep that night. She wasn't sure she'd planned to. She sat on the porch with the blanket around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped, which was itself a sign, and watched the sky, listened. The wind was running from the southwest now, steady and humid in a way that Kansas wind is rarely humid in July. Around midnight, the lightning began, not close, far to the southwest, illuminating the undersides of clouds that had been building all evening into something substantial. Each flash showed the shapes more clearly, the towers of dark cumulus that meant, in the particular grammar of Plains weather, serious intent. She thought about her grandfather, his 1946 field, the summer the extension man told him to sell. She thought about her father, who had taken her out to the field at age 8 during a hailstorm and stood with her in it, not recklessly, just long enough, and said, "You need to know what the field feels like when the weather's against it. Otherwise, you'll always be afraid of it." She thought about Augusto. She thought about him constantly, but specifically now, she thought about the morning they'd first walked this land together, before they were married, when he'd stood in the middle of the south field and turned in a slow circle, looking at all of it and said, "This land wants to grow things. You can feel it." She hadn't known then how true that was. She knew it now. The first drops hit the porch roof at 2:17 in the morning. Nell sat very still. The drops became a pattern. The pattern became a sound, the particular sound of serious rain on a dry roof, the kind of sound you don't hear often enough to forget what it means. It built. It deepened. By 2:30 it was raining with full commitment, not a storm, not a spectacle, just rain, steady and purposeful, the kind the ground could actually use, the kind that soaks in rather than running off, the kind that, in the specific mathematics of drought recovery, changes the calculus of survival. Nell stood up from her chair, walked to the edge of the porch, stood in the space where the rain was just starting to blow in under the overhang, and felt it on her face and hands. She stood there for a long time. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough at Augusto's funeral, in the root cellar in January when the books had looked truly impossible, once in the truck outside the equipment dealers in Pratt after Harwick's quote. She'd used her crying on the right things. What she felt instead was something that didn't have a common word for it. Something adjacent to vindication, but without the combativeness. Something adjacent to relief, but deeper than that. A settling, a recognition. She had been right. Not right in the sense of having known the rain would come. She hadn't known, she'd never known, no one ever knows. Right in the sense of having stayed present with what she had. Right in the sense of having treated the land as a partner rather than a gamble. Right in the sense of having done each day the specific work that the specific day required. She went inside and called Sable. It rang 4 times, 2:30 in the morning, Denver time, and then her daughter's voice came on, rough with sleep, alert with the particular alertness of someone whose mother calls in the middle of the night. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing," Nell said. "It's raining." A pause. She could hear the shift, the recalibration, on the other end. "How much?" "Still coming down. Good rain, slow and steady." Another pause. When Sable spoke again, her voice was different, softer. "Oh, Mum, it's going to be okay," Nell said, and she meant it in a way that wasn't optimism and wasn't certainty. It was something more durable than either. It was the statement of someone who had done the work and could meet whatever the outcome was without flinching. "Go stand in it," Sable said. "I already did." She heard her daughter laugh. Augusto's laugh, she'd always thought, the quick, surprised one, and they stayed on the phone together without talking for a little while, listening to the rain through 1,100 miles of open air. By morning, the rain gauge at the edge of the driveway read 1.8 inches. Nell walked the field at 7 in boots, in the beautiful impracticality of wet soil after drought. Every step had a different sound and a different give, and she paid attention to all of them. The east sections, the thin ones, the ones she'd been worried about, had an uprightness to the plants that hadn't been there yesterday. Not fully recovered, but present, committed. The bowl had drunk it all and wanted more, which was what the bowl always did. She stood in the middle of it and felt the moisture in the air and thought, this might be enough. It might not be enough. But it's something real. Levon appeared at the fence line around 8. He didn't say anything, just looked at the field and then at her, and nodded in a way that communicated a complete sentence. Birch came by at 10, this time without his rehearsed speech. He just asked how the ground looked and listened while she told him, and took notes, and thanked her before he left. Corva from the diner called at noon. She apparently called every farm family she knew after significant weather events, Nell learned, and simply said, "Good rain last night," to which Nell said, "Yes, it was," and they both understood that the conversation meant considerably more than its words. The federal assistance, as predicted, arrived late. A letter in mid-August confirmed a partial payment, enough to matter, not enough to solve everything, which is the nature of assistance. Nell noted it in the green composition book alongside the soil moisture readings and the irrigation logs. By harvest, the yield was below average. Anyone pretending otherwise would be lying, and Nell did not pretend. The sorghum from the east sections came in thin. The bowl produced something close to normal. The overall picture was survivable. She sat with the numbers at the kitchen table in October and worked through them carefully, the same way she'd worked through everything, with specificity, without catastrophe. The savings was lower. The equipment loan would need to be renegotiated again in spring. There were decisions ahead that she hadn't made yet, but the land was here. She was here. She thought about something Dessa had written. She's never confused what she knows with what she feels, and thought, that's not entirely right. I know and feel the same things. I just learned a long time ago that neither one of them is the whole story. She closed the green composition book, made herself dinner, sat on the porch after. In November, Ovaline drove up from Oklahoma. She'd written to say she was passing through, heading to see family in Omaha. A long drive, would it be too much trouble? And Nell had written back that it was no trouble at all. She had a guest room and a full pot of coffee and a root cellar that stayed 60 degrees even in November, which was Augusto's best room and had always been better than any hotel. Ovaline was a small woman, deeply weathered, with the kind of eyes that don't look away from things. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and they spent the first 20 minutes in the way that people who have been corresponding by letter sometimes spend the first meeting, recalibrating the person to match the words, finding the places where they fit and the places where they're different from what you imagined. They were more alike than different. They walked the field on Friday morning, which was cold and grey and fully autumnal in the way that the plains are fully autumnal, without reservation, without the hedging of more temperate climates. "This is the bowl?" Ovaline asked, stopping at the northwest corner of the south field. "That's it." Ovaline crouched down, picked up a handful of soil, turned it in her fingers with the unself-conscious expertise of someone for whom this is the most natural gesture in the world. "Good soil," she said. "Deep. It's always been the strong part," Nell said. Ovaline stood, brushed her hand off on her pants, looked around at the field, the flat horizon, the grain elevator visible at the edge of Millhaven to the north. "In the article," Ovaline said, "she wrote that you never confused what you know with what you feel." "I thought about that line," Nell said. "I'm not sure it's entirely true." "What do you mean?" Nell looked at the field for a moment, at the stripped stalks, the turned earth, the whole honest apparatus of a year's work laid bare in November. "When I know this soil," she said, "I feel it. When I feel this land, I know it. I'm not sure they're separate." She paused. "I think she was trying to say that I don't let the feeling panic me. That's probably more accurate." Ovaline nodded slowly. "My husband used to say that farming is just choosing to believe in spring while you're standing in winter." Nell considered this. "Augusto would have liked that," she said. They stood in the bowl for a while longer. The wind moved through the empty rows with a particular sound, a different sound than it made in the growing season, quieter, more spacious, a resting sound. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table after dinner, and Ovaline asked about the green composition book, and Nell showed her the entries from the season, the moisture readings, the irrigation notes, the math that had been reworked so many times. And in the first few pages, Augusto's handwriting, equipment notes, a list, a small drawing of the pivot arm that was just slightly wrong anatomically, which made both women smile. "He sounds like he was a good man," Ovaline said. "He was a specific man," Nell said, "which is better than good, I think. He was exactly who he was." Ovaline left on Saturday morning. They embraced in the driveway, briefly, firmly, the way people embrace when the affection is real and doesn't need performance. "Same time next year," Ovaline said. "If you're passing through Omaha," Nell said. Ovaline laughed, got in her truck, drove down the long, flat road toward the highway. Nell watched her go, then turned and looked at the field, the whole empty, patient expanse of it, the soil resting, holding what the rain had left, waiting. She thought, next spring, and meant it. There's a thing that happens when you watch a person stay. Not stay out of stubbornness, though there's some of that too, and she'd be the first to admit it, but stay out of knowledge. Out of the conviction that what you have in your hands is real, and that real things deserve the full effort of your attention, even when, especially when, the sky stops cooperating. Nell Voss didn't save her farm by being exceptional. She saved it by being present, by knowing the bold from the flat, the deep soil from the shallow, by accepting help when Levon stood at the fence line with his hat in his hands and couldn't quite say what he was actually offering, by staying on the phone with her daughter at 2:30 in the morning, listening to rain. The drought came back the following year. Lighter, but it came back. It usually does. And she was ready. Not because she knew it would be fine, but because she'd learned, in the deepest way a person can learn something, that preparation and presence are the only honest answers to uncertainty. That you plant your last seeds not because you're guaranteed a harvest, but because the ground deserves your best effort, and so does the person you're trying to remain. If this story landed somewhere real for you, if you've ever stood in your own version of a dry field and made a decision that nobody else could make for you, leave that in the comments. Tell me what it was. Tell me where you're watching from. Like this video if Nell's story meant something to you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people doing the extraordinary thing of refusing to disappear. And I'll see you in the next one.